Hey there, Terry here. Just a quick announcement that if you like giving voice to depression, you might also like my new podcast, Recoverable. On it, I will be asking experts the top 10 most searched questions about different addictions and mental health conditions and therapies. Look for Recoverable wherever you get your podcasts. Hello and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com, the best place to find mental health and addiction treatment for anyone, anywhere.
Each week, we profile a guest who shares openly about their mental health journey. They share because they understand that when people don't talk about their depression or other mental health conditions, those of us who do struggle with them can feel like we're the only ones, that there's something wrong with us, and that no one understands. We understand.
I'm Terry McGuire, the creator and co-host of this podcast. You have my promise that we'll keep it real here. Depression is real, and we're not going to sugarcoat our discussions about it.
Hope is also real, and you'll get a dose of that here too. I'm Carly McCullough, a licensed social worker and educator, and Terry's daughter. We've both experienced depression and also support loved ones struggling with it. We're here to normalize talking about depression and mental health in our communities, as well as our families.
And to share real-world tested strategies that have worked for other people who have walked similar paths. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Carly. Well, here's a phrase I never imagined saying. Welcome to the 500th episode of the Giving Voice to Depression podcast.
Wow, think about what that means. People in 171 countries and territories across the globe have gone online looking for some explanation for what they're experiencing, to find trusted information and a sense that they're not alone in what is a very isolating experience. Our first month back in 2017, we had 106 plays. Now, close to 11,000 people listen every month. And our weekly guests aren't sharing secrets about how to win the lottery. They're talking about the darkness that envelops them, the hopeless thoughts and the physical weight that accompany it, and the ways they manage and survive when both can be really challenging.
But it has never been about the numbers. It's always been about you. It's been about the person listening while lying in bed, not sure how they're going to get through the day, and the person driving home from work, holding it together until they can safely fall apart. It's for the person who feels like they should be better by now and doesn't understand why they're not.
So today, our former co-host, Dr. Anita Sands, joins us for a look back on this journey. She's the first voice you'll hear in the conversation. And thank you for being here. Not for 500 episodes, but for today. For yourself. Please listen as we give voice to depression.
Can we just acknowledge how amazing it is that a podcast about one of the most depressing subjects on the planet is celebrating its 500th episode? That cannot be by mistake. That is absolutely something not just to celebrate, but to say what worked. And what is working, because that's phenomenal.
Hear, hear.
Probably one of the main reasons why the podcast has been so successful. It's because it's been about the stories, the authentic reality of living with depression, managing it, and treating it. And I think that's important to acknowledge.
Thanks.
And one of the things that you've done is you have continued to center your guests and what listeners can get from them using your tools really just as the vessel for these stories. And that is both what has made this podcast different, what's made it possible to make 500 episodes, and also what makes having a conversation about what it's been like to make 500 episodes uncomfortable for you.
Because I just always want to say that it's not about the number, whether it's 500 episodes or 3 million downloads or whatever, but about what those numbers represent. Mm-hmm. And that's people who are willing to sit down in front of a microphone and tell a story, tell some of their story. That's a part that they probably have been encouraged explicitly or implicitly to keep quiet. It's a shameful part. It's none of our favorite parts. It's certainly not my favorite part of me. But I just am blown away by how many people have been willing to trust us and to share with the sole purpose of letting other people know they're not alone.
It's the trust of an interview. And then it's the trust of the editing of that interview and the choices that my mom has made as producer and editor in what would be most useful to listeners and most supportive to the person telling their story. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes you're talking to someone and then you're driving home or walking home and going, oh, I wish I hadn't shared that part, right? I've heard it called a vulnerability hangover. And there's something that I know my mom's been really intentional about taking care and really honoring the stories that are shared. And I think that is one of the things that makes it unique. You have not included some of the most salacious details.
Yes.
What was it like for you to hold parts of these interviews that even us as your co-hosts, that we haven't, that stuff you've held on your own? Those aren't parts that we've even been there to support you with.
They're generally 45 minutes to an hour that we talk, and it ends up being a 20 to 25 minute episode. So it's a lot that doesn't make it in. And mostly it's what wouldn't serve the listener. When I think that the themes connect us and the details divide us. And I recently interviewed a woman, and her story was many people's story. They're going to relate to it, and that's what we're doing here. But there was a part of it that I knew if someone heard, they would dismiss the rest. They would think she had resources and opportunities and all the things that they might not have. And of course, she can get through it, but I don't have those things, so I can't. So I just took them out so that the parts that you'd be more likely to be able to relate to were what I left in.
And a really interesting place where my mind was going as you were answering that is how amazing I think it was that you took your own lived experience of depression and could connect with your guests in a way that I think helped them to feel safe in telling their stories and in being vulnerable with you, because you were willing to be vulnerable first. And I can imagine that's also a huge shift from when you're in front of the camera and you're telling the news and you're reading your script and it's very much not about you, but this actually was a really important part of you that you were willing to lead with, to share. Both you and Bridget, starting the podcast saying it's not just you and it's not just our guests who are going to come on and talk about this. This is our lived experience. And we may not get everything about what you're sharing, but we understand a lot of it. We really understand it. We've lived it. And then there were so many times in episodes where someone was telling their story, and then you were willing to say, and this is what it's like for me when, or oftentimes I'll find myself when I'm depressed thinking this or doing that, and sort of then allowing them to fill in the space and say, yes, me too. And this is my particular way that I've experienced it. That, I think, has made this effective in a way that it wouldn't have, Terry, if you used just your reporting and incredible, delivery of information skill set. And instead, you brought yourself as a whole person and were very, very real. And I remember one of the episodes that we taped together was right after you had lost your mom. And you brought that in. You brought that in terms of where you were at and how things were hitting you. And so just in real time, being real, I think is one of the reasons why this podcast stands out. And it's relatable. It's authentic. People hear it. They hear it in the voices of the guests, but they also hear it in your voice. They heard it in Bridget's. I hope they heard it in mine. I hope they hear that in Carly's now.
Thank you so much for lifting that up. Also, in real time, being real is like the new slogan.
I know, I like it too.
We should make t-shirts or something. It's time for merch. What some of our other listeners don't know, obviously, folks are now familiar that my mom is my mom. And that's our relationship here. But It's my Aunt Bridget, who was the original co-host. There have been 3 generations of my family who have been recorded on this show. I have a sibling who is involved with some of the social media. Part of the actual authenticity that I hear you talking about, Dr. Sands, that my mom brought to the table, consciously or not, was you brought your squad to it, right? You brought your people, and that if part of your mission and the original starting of this podcast was to dispel stigma and to reduce it, you've been doing that work with us too, both sort of literally and figuratively. These are conversations we have in a different way. So many people are talking the talk and very few people are walking the walk. And I think you have, in a audio podcast, you have found a way to both talk the talk and walk the walk.
We did not get together, by the way, and decide we were going to do this to you, Terry.
I appreciate that. Sort of. I appreciate it.
Kind of, sort of.
I appreciate hearing it. I just don't know how to edit it. I was going to pivot. One of my takeaways, one of the things that's been most valuable for me, because I'm also a listener, is language. And it's not just, oh, someone else has depression, which has its own value. I'm not the only person going through an experience like this. But we've been told that people literally, I just wrote down a comment that somebody sent. It said, I wrote down what you said, exactly how you said it, and I brought it to my doctor. And somebody else said, because of listening to that episode, I had the words to sit down with my kid and say, hey, I don't think you're okay. I'm seeing this. So in addition to connecting with somebody's story, that language factor is a really important piece. It really has been helpful to me to be able to explain it better to my doctor, my family, my friends. Because when I started the podcast, I didn't talk about it. I never thought to talk about it. So let's talk about language.
One of the things that I hear you talking about in terms of language is we've actually featured several episodes of parents and children, other parents and children, having a conversation about mental health with their parents or children. And so in April, we talked with Jessie about growing up in a household where depression was talked about openly. Mm. And I think sometimes people need to hear how other people navigate these things. We don't need a script, but we need to hear how somebody navigated it first before I can find my own words for describing it. And in November of last year, you two talked with TJ, who talked with his son about mental illness and who was quite young. And so what is the appropriate age for these things is really interesting. So it's been about, yes, talking to your doctor, yes, talking to your therapist. Also, how do we break that pattern of not talking about it, and how can we empower ourselves and our listeners to get a little bit braver about finding our own words or borrowing others? If someone else has found a way to express what we've been trying to find the language for, that can offer so much relief and a bridge to connecting to someone else and sharing about what the experience is that you didn't have before.
I agree. And I don't even think it's the terms that when the experts come on and, although I've learned some terms that I didn't know that have been actually very, very helpful. But as Terry sits and interviews people to have them share their experience, they have to come up with their words, whatever those words are. You're hearing, again, real, authentic human language. I'm trying to tell you how this made me feel, or I'm trying to tell you what it's like when the depression is really bad. And almost any of the words that the guests use to describe that will resonate with someone else. Maybe not everybody, but they'll resonate with someone. And then that gets to not just how is language important for communicating with others, but how language is important because, and like you were saying, Carly, until you hear your experience in the words of another human being on this planet, that feeling of, am I the only one? Am I alone? Am I crazy? Am I hopeless? That's the thing that I think just is the most powerful. And it seems to be one of the threads of the stories of some of my favorite guests. It was just, I suddenly realized it wasn't just me. I wasn't doing these things and nobody else does them. I wasn't thinking these things and nobody else thinks them. I wasn't feeling these things. So important. And so the language itself, I always say I don't like to use a lot of technical professional jargon because I actually really just prefer the struggle of finding just the way to say it as a person, not as the role of therapist or psychologist. And I got the most out of, and I hope that other people did, I got the most out of people just honestly, sometimes even struggling, but just saying, this is what it was like for me. That language.
The weighted blanket was the best way to describe, or a brilliant way to describe that depression can have a physical weight to it. I love having those other people's language to pull. And one of my favorite descriptions of depression was, John was his name. It was forever ago, maybe 8 years ago. And he said that it's like a spreadsheet that auto-fills your every flaw. And auto-deletes everything good about you.
Mm-hmm. Great image.
And I was like, oh, it does, right? And I can see it happening. You can see the letters disappearing. So those are the things, and I will pull them out, and I find myself very frequently quoting a guest. I can't remember all their names anymore because there are so many of them, but I do remember what they said, and I do remember how it helped me.
Yeah. In August, we talked with Kevin, who drew a parallel between his experience being bullied in childhood and being bullied by depression. For me to have that really concrete bullying as a thread was really useful. And I gotta say, Mom, I actually think that in recording these podcasts, I have grown a deep appreciation for my medication. And it's actually because of what you're talking about, which is the medication that I'm on. What it does in my brain is it stops the part of the spreadsheet that deletes the good stuff. I actually need that. When I hear the volume of my depression being louder, I turn up all sorts of my supports. And I forget which guest, but she suggested that you have a menu of the things that support you. And I have it right next to where I work all day. And I drew it like a bingo card. And I fill in the bubbles as new things come to me. Because when you're in it, you go, nothing helps. And you go, yes, it does. Look up the thing you already made yourself.
I cannot hear the word bingo card without thinking of Anita. And Anita, you brought this up in the context of family holiday situations, but you could use it for any situation you know is going to be tricky. Throw that one out to us real fast, because it's one of my favorites.
Oh, it originally came from saying, if I'm dealing with a situation that I really don't want to deal with, but I have to, that's just the reality. I just sort of, as a rebellious, I guess, part of me just said, let's try to make this fun. Let's try to make this where dealing with the reality could actually somehow become a win-win situation for me. I'm going to go to a family gathering. This person's going to say this and do this, and it's going to make me upset or sad or angry or irritated or whatever. And then say, but I want them to do that because then I get to put the X in that little space there, and I'm going to get bingo. And if I get bingo, I'm going to promise myself something good for me, some good self-care thing. I think that management piece, the fact that we have to deal with something that's awful and we don't want to deal with it, but we'll waste even more energy not just facing it and dealing with it. We're going to somehow have to find a way to do it. And I was always like, let's just try to make it easy. Let's just try to make it fun. Let's make it doable. And that's most of the recommendations that I think are really helpful from your experts and from even your own guests. It's like, what's the most realistic, doable thing I can do here that might work? And so for me, I always know that humor and depression don't go together. They're like oil and water. And so if you can somehow poke holes in depression or in stressful situations and inject humor, it lightens, it really literally energetically lightens things. So that bingo card in that episode was about, let's lighten up a situation that can be really heavy and really daunting and something you completely dread. And now let's make it not so that. A little fun, a little interesting, let's gamify it a little bit.
Let's talk about mental health management tools, because that's one of the big parts of this podcast. It's not just their stories, it's how do you manage your depression? Because that is something somebody can take from an episode. Another really good one that I liked was the episode where the woman talked about writing the ugly out. And when you talk about journaling, it's kind of like saying yoga. You know, if you do yoga, you appreciate the suggestion. If you don't, you're like, oh, shut up with the yoga. Journaling can be the same way.
Guess which one mom is.
Journaling can be the same way. But one of the reasons people can resist journaling is because it's really private and someone can pick it up and read it. And she figured out a hack that made that not happen, where she took her page and wrote what she was writing, turned it 90 degrees, wrote over that 90 degrees, because it's about getting it out, not about for her to read it later. And by the end, you can't read anything. And then she actually painted over them and turned all that ugliness into art. And I love her stuff. And that was one of the guests where you just go, oh, I am so still thinking in the box. Are there any tools that you remember from episodes that made you think, oh, I think that'd be very helpful? I mean, Anita, you teach people tools.
Yeah, and that's actually, as I was thinking about, one of my favorite sets of tools. I like the tools around connection and not allowing depression to isolate you. And so we've had tons of guests who have given us really helpful tips about how to do this, as well as if you're a family member, a friend, a coworker, you know, what to be looking for so you can have that connection. But I think some of the tools that I love the most are the ones kind of in line with what you were saying, Carly, about that bully, that really, in one way or another, say, when you are depressed and that thought process, that depressive thought process begins, and it's really even hard sometimes to figure out when did it start, but you know, once it gets going, how do we wrap the caution tape around that and say, you need somebody to help you investigate this. We're going to cordon this off. We're going to wrap it in that yellow caution tape. Nobody's allowed in unless you're there with them. We're going to handle this together, kind of thing. So friends, therapists, other kinds of, therapeutic techniques. But I think the episodes that really emphasized you cannot trust your depressive thought process. Mm-hmm. If you can't stop it, if you can't interrupt it, if it starts getting to that point where you're thinking the world or the people you love are better off without you, which is sort of like one of those end stages of the depressive thought process, it's sort of like, stop, we're cordoning this off and we've got to get somebody else to come in. And there were many guests who used different ways of doing that. We even we talked about that whole process of even planning for when that happens and who are you going to call and who's going to be texting and checking in with you and things like that.
Yeah, safety planning.
To me, as a tool, I feel like those episodes that said, look, you could get so lost. Your depression could lie to you so hard that it will be hard to come back from this. You may not come back from this if we don't interrupt that process in some way. And as a tool, and Terry, I remember the video where you were like, the voice is the same. The depressive voice is the same. Depression speaks the same to people. It uses the same words, the same phrases. So we could show people this is what it's going to look like when depression is lying to you. And what do you do if you start believing those lies? Or what do you do if you can't turn that voice off? So for me, like the connection piece is so critically important. The self-compassion piece is so important. But I also I really feel like the power of people knowing, again, this is what depression sounds like in my head. This is what I'm saying to myself. This is what my depression's saying to me. And then interrupting it, finding the ways to interrupt that, to notice it, to do something about it. In one episode, we said, you're trying to fix something broken with something that's broken. And it's not going to work. So knowing when to say, I need help.
That's right.
Those are the episodes that, again, as a therapist, I was like, yes, because, cognitive behavioral therapy can get a bad rap sometimes. And especially if it's applied just as like a, do this, do that. But understanding the power of those thoughts to cause incredible damage, both chronic and acute, is what many of those episodes that I thought were very powerful were about.
We did 4 episodes, 2 at a time, with a young man, Sam Dillon Finch, and he gave us...
I was just about to bring him up.
Were you?
Yeah.
I want to hear what you have to say. Very specific ways to reach out, which can be, it says reach out if you need help. Yeah, reach out. You think no one cares. You think it's you, not depression, because that's what it's telling you. But those I loved. And then how to reach in, knowing somebody with depression is unlikely to reach out. So if you just notice you're not yourself, which is, I think, the symptoms we need to look for as opposed to whatever the list is on WebMD. Somebody's not themselves, and you say, I've noticed this. And if they say, stay the hell away, which is what I would say, it's like, I will. But if you go to your front door right now, there's some soup on your porch. And I'm going to check in with you. Pick up if you want. You'll talk, or I'll just listen, or don't. But know that was me because I love you and I care. And all those things, I didn't know them. I didn't talk about this before, and it's so helpful to know. Car, what were you going to say?
So before I was co-host, I was also a listener, and I remember those Sam Dillon Finch episodes, and they have links directly to some of the blog posts that he's written around those. And so I was looking just this morning about 11 important ways my loved ones supported me during a mental health crisis. Like, how beautiful is that? I think one of the things that our podcast has done a good job of is dispelling the myth that talking to someone who's feeling heavy about the heaviness makes it worse. We've talked about it around grief. We've talked around it around suicide. We've talked about it around all sorts of things. But when someone is in it, saying, are you in it? Doesn't make it worse. Like there's all sorts of ways that is a useful strategy. They're really just about like, how are you? And I know that in some cultures, how are you doing? That translates to, have you eaten yet? Have you eaten today?
I love that.
But in slowing down to eat something, slowing down enough to eat something, or activating enough to eat something, you're connecting with your body. You can't have rushed breath. You're feeling physical sensations. All of those things are deeply grounding.
And nourishing, literally.
Literally and metaphorically.
That is the power of those episodes and the ones that tell us how to do it really. Like how am I actually going to accomplish this? Not just the concept, but the how. And I know, Terry, one of my favorite episodes was Emily Director's Cereal for Dinner.
Yes.
And her website.
Yes.
Because it's like, yes, I know I need to eat. Yes, I know I need, to take care of myself and take care of hygiene and manage laundry and housework and kids and all of those things. How?
Right.
How, when you are at one of your lowest energy motivation points because of depression and are dealing with side effects of meds and things like that, how am I going to do this? And so those episodes, particular Cereal for Dinner, that said, you can have cereal for dinner. It's okay. Like reducing any unrealistic standards or expectations or perfectionism and talking about keeping wipes next to the bed and, bottles of water next to your bed and those kinds of things, so that there's no shame. It really, in getting into the details of the how, it also really started removing shame. Because again, if these are strategies for people who are depressed, then I'm not failing because I keep a bottle of water and a protein bar and my medication right next to me. And that's all I'm going to be able to do today. Yes.
And to just change your pillowcase instead of your sheets, or whatever it might be.
Yes. Just how can I do it? Don't tell me, yes, it would be good if I. So again, that's whole that do yoga, go take a walk, eat well. It's like, how do you actually do that when you're struggling?
I remember you saying, even if you get out of your bed to lay on the couch, you have made a change.
Oh, yes. My favorite thing to say, go from the bed to the couch. That's actually incredible change right there. Change of location, change of light, change of sensory stimulation that your brain so needs gentle but novel stimulation to be able to start healing. So you're right, that from the bed to the couch. And then if you're like, wow, that's an acceptable goal, like that's all I'm going to do today differently. Yeah. So what's the smallest doable step? All of those episodes that got to those, how do I do it? I loved. I thought they were really powerful.
That reminds me, I don't know if either of you have watched the latest and last season of Queer Eye on Netflix, but they are working with two sisters who are navigating things differently and cohabitating. And one of them has a snack cart in her room. And no questions asked, but it was, like chips and granola bars, like salty and sweet and this, and some bottles of water at the bottom in a little like bathroom type of rolly cart. And I don't think this person would necessarily identify as having depression, but I just thought there's nothing wrong with that. I hope they don't take that away. I hope they were like, we've never seen a snack cart in the bedroom before. And I was like, nice. Okay, but don't judge it. And they didn't. And when they redid her bedroom, they included a different snack cart, but it was still present. And I thought, if I was in a hypothetical world in which I was living with you, Mom, or as a teenager, and you knew that I was having a hard time, what a gift it would have felt like for you to see a snack cart rolled into my room rather than, you are not coming down for dinner. We eat as a family. This is, again, a hypothetical situation, but all the type of judgment that can come around how someone's coping. Mm-hmm. And if all you can do is get from the bed to the snack cart, at least I know you ate something today. Yeah, there were just some of those things that I've just been thinking about as what are those steps that we can take to make life easier for ourselves? And also ways of reaching out to others, just about those little incremental steps.
Without the shame.
Without the shame.
Yeah.
To me, there's that compassion.
The self-shame or the external shaming.
Right. No shame, no judgment, just what works. And which, again, saying no shame is really hard because your depressive thought process is going to shame you for it. But if you can do the thing, you still feel some shame with it. I'd rather somebody do the thing. But if we can do it and not shame ourselves at the same time,
that'd be so nice.
That's like extra boost for getting better. Yeah.
And that's where we're going to stop today. But we will continue our discussion next week. As always, thanks for joining us. We also post across social media daily. And as we mentioned, we have an active, supportive, and well-monitored Facebook community. Just search for Giving Voice to Depression. We really hope that this discussion helps give some language or context to your own depression or ideas for how to support someone else in your life living with it. We invite you to check out the hundreds of episodes in our archive and to explore both the Resource Hub and treatment options on recovery.com. Depression is too dark a road to walk alone.
We'll be back next week.